Good to have your company. You are what you eat, they say, but perhaps these days it should be you are what we tell you to eat. From alleged health benefits to a perceived kinder world. Why vegans are shouting louder and being heard. Welcome to Roundtable with me, David Foster. It is a very popular search on Google these days. What is a vegan? Well, vegans don't use any products that come from animals, including dairy, fish and eggs, even honey, because bees are apparently exploited, or silk, because of silkworm farms. It all seems friendly enough, so why has this lifestyle movement become such an angry political debate?
It was brought to our attention on social media, and now the vegan buzz has spread. High streets and food stalls are adapting to the increased demand for plant-based options. The market is worth $570 million in the UK alone. Followers are convinced it's the future, with less impact on the environment and numerous health benefits, although not all agree.
We have a few concerns over a vegan diet, especially with children, because you have very low sources of iron.
Over the past 4 years, the number of vegans in the UK has quadrupled to 600,000. But veganism has created pockets of outrage, stirring backlash against vegans and hatred towards meat eaters. With ongoing reports of militant veganism, is it being forced down people's throats?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that joining us in the studio we have Roisin McAuley, campaigner at Viva, which is one of Britain's biggest vegan campaign groups. We have Maria Chiorando, editor of Plant-Based News. Caroline Stocks is with us, agriculture journalist specialising in farming and the environment, and Rhiannon Lambert, nutritionist from Harley Street. Great to have you all with us here. Roisin, let me ask you, first of all, are you out to save the world or are you out to save animals?
Both. You do both at the same time by becoming vegan. Vegan's best for the animals, for the environment and for your health. So it's really kind of an all-rounder.
Why has it become so popular?
Because I think people are starting to see the benefits. You know, when I first went vegan, people mainly did it for the animals, and as veganism has grown, the products that are available have grown, and so has the information we have about health and the environment. So now there's multiple pathways into veganism, which is why we see a rise in veganism.
And multiple types of vegan. There are the militant types who are attracting an awful lot of headlines. You know, barging into restaurants, shouting at people about eating steaks, pig farmers who've had to spend £50,000 on security, etc., etc. It's perhaps going too far.
I really don't like the phrase militant vegan because it implies a level of aggression and violence which
is what I'm talking about here.
Haven't seen within veganism. Viva is completely against violence. We are entirely peaceful and promote a positive vegan message. And veganism is built on compassion. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So this idea of the militant vegan is something portrayed in the media, which isn't accurate. And it does go two ways. In contrast, the animal agriculture industry is built on the violent oppression and slaughter of animals. We're not the violent ones here. The animal agriculture industry is, and we also receive death threats.
But Caroline, let me ask you, first of all, are vegans right to say that the farming industry has got it wrong?
No, I think pretty much all farmers are very respectful of vegans and are very happy that people have the choice over what they eat. I think where the real problem lies, I know you don't like the term militant, but there is a wing of certain campaigners who are quite aggressive in the way that they approach the discussion, in the types of language they use, and also in their actions as well. And it's really unfortunate because it prevents the kinds of productive discussions we should really be having about people's diets, which is how to make them more sustainable, how to make them more sustainable for the environment, but also for their nutrition.
What about the fact that we perhaps eat too much meat? But that is dangerous, obviously for the animals, but that is dangerous for the planet.
Yeah, I 100% agree that we need to take a look at our diets. I think we should be eating less meat. That we've got to this point where it's just become normal for everybody to eat meat, or for lots of people to eat meat every single day, where go back 20, 30 years. When I was a child, we only ever ate kind of chicken perhaps once a week, and then we'd have kind of leftovers for the rest of the week, and then we'd have a vegetarian meal during the end of the week. And that's the way that we should be going back to, having this more balanced diet. The problem is everybody's become used to having meat, and they're eating a lot more, and that's kind of not what we should be aiming for. It should be about balance.
Rhiannon, I see you nodding, but we will come to you about the health benefits or not in just a moment. But let me ask you, we have been meat eaters for hundreds of thousands of years. We are omnivores. We eat plants, we eat animals, we eat fish. That's what our bodies are used to.
Well, I mean, that is debatable, but also to some extent irrelevant. We can function perfectly healthily as herbivores, so why wouldn't we? But just to go back to an earlier point, I think it's bizarre to say the real problem is a very small number of people who are undertaking extreme actions, or even less extreme actions, like maybe spray painting, go vegan on a butcher's. These aren't actions that I would advocate, but actually the real problem is the fact that humanity is facing a crisis, the vast majority of which has been brought on by industrial animal farming, antibiotic resistance, the climate crisis, the moral obscenity of breeding animals into existence to give them a horrible life and a terrifying death. This is the real problem, not a few people saying something that you don't like, or maybe spray painting a slogan on a building.
Matter of choice, though, isn't it? We are, by generations, we are omnivores, most of us, aren't we? So it's a matter of choice. Why are you suggesting that people shouldn't have that choice?
I think you have to look at what personal choice means. You know, what about the personal choice of the animal who doesn't want to be born, doesn't want to live a terrible life, doesn't want to die? But also, what about the social responsibility? We have a real issue at the moment with an impending climate breakdown. The IPCC report that came out at the end of last year said we have 12 years to make a real change. Animal farming is a huge problem. Beef farming...
It's just one of a myriad selection of problems, though, isn't it? I mean, you know, tell people to stop driving cars. Do you drive a car?
Rarely, but I do. However,
yeah.
the most comprehensive study ever undertaken of the damage farming does to the planet said that the single biggest step we can take to reduce our own personal impact on the planet is to cut out animal products. It's far more impactful than changing to an electric car or reducing the number of flights that you take.
You're going to get better health if you become a vegan, because there are suggestions from the vegan movement that there are so many health benefits, from curing diabetes type 2, from heart disease, etc., that you have lower blood pressure, etc., which is put down as evidence. What evidence is there?
Okay, so in terms of nutritional evidence out there, we do know that people that adopt a lifestyle or a diet that increases the consumption of vegetables, pulses, legumes, nuts, seeds, does increase their intake of fibre, and of course will lead to a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. But I would also argue that from my point as a nutritionist, I only wish that the entire general public did consume their fibre day. We know 27% of the UK get their fibre day, which is not enough.
But what you are saying is that, yes, there are benefits from having pulses and fibres. We know that. But what are the benefits of just having those rather than having those with a bit of fish or a bit of chicken?
Nutritionally speaking, some people will be perfectly adapted to have a vegan diet. But also, if others are going about this, they won't be. So we do need to be careful of different micronutrient deficiencies that can occur, but they are solvable. And I think that's the real issue here, is that a lot of people are wanting to make lifestyle changes for the good or for their ethical beliefs. But nutritionally speaking, not everybody will be able to adapt to it quite so easily, and they could be putting themselves at a health risk too.
Roisin, I mentioned some of the comments that were made by your founder. I'm going to put them to you. She compared farming conditions, in a lot of cases, with Auschwitz, the death camp run by the Nazis. Now that speaks volumes for the kind of extremism we see, doesn't it?
When you read that comment out loud, you have to provide the context. So the founder of Viva, Juliette, has been doing this for 25 years, campaigning for a vegan world. She went into Hogwood Farm and she said that comment twice, once while she was in Hogwood looking at pens full of overcrowded pigs in filthy conditions, dead piglets dumped into gangways. The second time was when she went to the woodlands, which are owned by the farmer, and just found mass graves of bodies dumped, like skulls of pigs with ear tags still on them.
These aren't pigs, these aren't people. How can you possibly expect the general population to be on your side if you compare it to the murdering of people in death camps?
I would recommend that people go to the Viva website to listen to Juliet's explanation herself, because when she was in this very emotional...
She didn't like what she saw, and it was probably horrible, but I mean, it's nothing like Auschwitz.
When she was in this very emotional situation, she made those comments because that's what came to her mind, and I can only say people have to go to the website to listen to her statement to hear how she describes it herself.
You don't like the idea of militant veganism, and yet there's this Warwickshire pig farmer, Brian Hobel, you know of him. He said that he told a TV show's presenter that the harassment has continued. He's had to spend £50,000 on security after repeated break-ins on his farm, including by the campaign group Viva. He said, I think we have better conditions than most nursing homes. Well, you could agree or disagree with that, but break-ins by your group?
The Viva, we do not break into farms. We entered Hogwood Farm when it was unlocked.
This is the one you're talking about when you talk about
Yes.
what your founder said. Yeah.
This is what Hobble says, but the RSPCA said they do not endorse the low welfare conditions on that farm. Sadly, a lot of what happens on Hogwood Farm and other intensive factory farms is legal, and that's why Viva goes into these farms, because the public has a right to see what is hidden behind those walls. All we do is passively go in, film the conditions, and then share it with the public, who have a right to
You're
know.
not invited, you walk in when the gate's left open, or you go in under a fence where you can get in okay.
No, that's not accurate. And again, we have the full statement on the website.
What about the RSPCA?
This is a diversion.
He says they exonerated him for the conditions on his farm.
No, the RSPCA, and we have it in writing on multiple occasions, so they do not endorse the low welfare conditions on the farm. Sadly, it's legal, but that's what Viva is doing. We are campaigning to show the realities of intensive factory farming to the British public and to try and change the current legal standards for farming in the UK.
Okay, so Caroline, let me come back to you on this one. I mean, if farmers improve their conditions, I don't know about this gentleman in particular, but I mean, you know, there are a variety of different statements. He says better than a nursing home, you say terrible conditions there. But if there was a push to improve farming conditions overall in the UK, do you think you would appease the vegan movement? Or is it just, look, we're fighting against this at the moment, we'll find something else to fight against?
To start with, livestock farms in the UK and across Europe, specifically in the UK, are all part of accreditation schemes, which they have to meet certain welfare and environmental standards to ensure that they are performing in a proper way. It's unfortunate there are certain farmers, as with any industry, that might fall under the cracks and not quite meet those standards, but in most cases, in order to supply certain retailers or to obtain subsidies, farmers have to meet certain standards. And if you go to the majority of livestock farms, you will meet farmers who are really committed to their animals' health and welfare and would be really horrified to suggest, by suggestions that their welfare is not being looked at.
Would you go to one of these farms that had accreditation and kept animals, let's say, free range? Please, let me finish. Wandering around doing what they would like to do, unaware of their impending doom because they're having a nice meal every day, they're out in the sunshine or the rain or whatever. Would you go to one of those farms and say, actually, this is fine?
Firstly, the accreditation schemes, in many cases, I think are very little more than a marketing scam. If you look at what these accreditation schemes actually guarantee, it's usually the legal minimum standards for welfare or slightly above that, and they're not foolproof. People have been thrown off these schemes. I believe a while ago, Red Tractor, only 1 out of 1,000 visits that Red Tractor inspectors would make to farms were unannounced. So people know these inspectors are coming.
Go back to my point, which is if you saw reasonable conditions and happy pigs or whatever they were, would you think that was okay?
No, I mean, I have been to a couple of farms and the conditions were not anything but
it's
to get
not
to your
the fact
question,
that they could be kept in wonderful conditions. You're just against it per se.
When I first went vegan, I went vegan on the grounds of animal welfare. Animal welfare was so low, and I didn't want to be part of that. The longer I've been vegan, the more I've embraced the philosophical, the philosophy behind it, which is that animals are not ours to exploit. It doesn't matter how well we treat them before we kill them. They're not ours to bring to life and then put to death. It's not something I think we should do.
Okay, you get a lot of people coming to you saying, I'm changing my diet. Is it a fad at the moment then?
I wouldn't like to ever call veganism a fad because of the reasons we have discussed.
But with a lot of people, might it be?
I think at the moment, people do jump on it for the wrong reasons, of course. They may see Beyonce doing a vegan diet and think it's associated with weight loss. Therefore, they don't fully understand the whole context of a vegan diet. But my biggest concern is obviously there's a big rise of people doing it. And actually, it's quite a good thing for the environment. You know, I think it's great to have meat-free Mondays. It's a good incentive. I want people to get different diversity of plant-based foods in their diet. But there is a big risk of being deficient, so we just need to be educating people to help them know what they need to get in their diet. And there's certain elements people don't think of, like iodine, for instance. That's involved in neurological health, so cognitive growth, and it's also involved in
Get that from a pig
thyroid.
or a cow or whatever?
Well,
Do you get it from meat?
Actually, it's
and
more
fish?
from fish and dairy
Right.
products.
So it's good for you.
It is a good element that everybody should get, especially youngsters, but you can get it in salt as well, so iodinized salt. But a lot of the time, these are things that I would love to persuade everyone making a switch to a plant-based lifestyle to take. Because there are options out there, but I would love to see more education on the nutritional front
You
of
see,
veganism.
Rhiannon, you've talked an awful lot about the overall picture, which
Yeah.
I know is what you're concerned with. But this is a straight-up question. Is it better for you health-wise to be a vegan?
I couldn't possibly say on an individual level because I don't know everyone's diets and lifestyles. For some people, the answer would definitely be yes, it would benefit them. But for others,
Would they already have to have an
No.
existing problem?
potentially, but actually I can't say again because it's such a unique case. Let's take an example. I may have an eating disorder client that definitely needs more nourishment. A vegan diet may not be applicable and not
Where
help
do
their
you get
condition.
more nourishment?
For them in that case, it
If
would
you're
be...
not a vegan, where do you get
If
more
you're not a
nourishment?
vegan, where do you get more nourishment?
Yeah.
Fruit and vegetables and pulses, actually.
Yeah.
It's-
Rather than meat.
Rather than meat, I would say, in terms of overall benefits. But meat does help a lot of people get nutrition very easily. So it's definitely one of those things that I think the environment on a whole, we should be reducing dairy. In fact, the study that came out last week in the Lancet said we do need to reduce consumption of meat, dairy and sugar by half and double the amount of vegetables and pulses we eat.
That would put an awful lot of people out of business.
Yes, and also that study by the Lancet has come under quite heavy criticism over the last week, purely for the levels of nutrients that I'm sure you know far more about it than I do, but I've read various reports from nutritionists saying that actually what the Lancet suggests wouldn't actually be nutritionally balanced for the majority of people. Also, that report was led by people with kind of non-farming interests, let's say, so was perhaps a little more biased than we perhaps should have had.
But back to that earlier point, which is this would put an awful lot of people out of business, wouldn't it? If we did what is being advocated by at least two members of our panel, perhaps 2.5 here.
Yes.
A lot of people you go and see that you like, that you mix with, that you write about, that's it, that's the end, unless they
Yes,
go
especially
to arable farming, and you can't arable farm every bit of land.
Yeah, I think you have to look at a case-by-case basis, especially in the UK. We have the greatest climate for producing grass, which humans can't make use of, and especially in Wales and in Scotland, the landscape is very much one that can't be farmed. We can't really grow vegetables on it. We can't grow crops on it in the same way that we can produce sheep and beef on it. So if we start saying, right, everyone's got to go vegan, then a lot of those farmers would have to go out of business.
No, not necessarily, because you could switch from beef and dairy to simply sheep, and you could just take the wool from the sheep and some of the, well, not necessarily the milk, because you wouldn't like that, but you could take the wool from them. You don't have to eat them.
You could, but wool is not a profitable industry. Okay. Farmers have been losing money on sheep shearing for years and years. Also, our climate means that a lot of our wool isn't the really high quality that people want to pay for, so it's just not practical.
Okay. What about the fact that, I can't remember where I read this, but I think it's true. In Malawi, right, they don't eat very much meat, and they have a higher proportion of people there that are stunted than any other country in the world.
I mean, I can't, this is not my area.
One of you quoted this. Was that you?
I didn't quote it.
It was you, Caroline. Okay.
Yeah.
You can't answer that specifically.
Yeah.
But if you start out as a vegan, and you were 7, I think, 5 or 7 before you became a vegan, you were a vegetarian, are there unknown dangers to one's health?
I don't believe so. I think if you follow a well-planned plant-based diet that has been found to be healthy for all stages of life by the major nutritional bodies.
I think the key there is well planned, and
Yeah.
unfortunately in other countries perhaps where they're not so fortunate to have access to the information we have here, it would never be well planned, which is perhaps, I'm just making an assumption on this research, where the correlation comes from, of course, stunted growth or malnutrition, because they may not have access to a variety of foods.
I would also say that using that study in this context is kind of irrelevant and diverting from the topic at hand, because we are in the UK, we're fortunate enough to be able to have a vegan diet. We have absolutely no need to not have a vegan diet in the UK, so we should be thinking about how we can do that here, worrying about other countries later.
Okay. Now you mentioned Malawi. I mean, do you think that's the case in other countries, that if people don't eat meat, they can end up, if they start off their lives this way, they can end up with health problems?
Obviously, I'm not a scientist.
No, I know, but I mean, you mentioned the Malawi side
Yep.
of things, where people are stunted, that's a medical fact, and they don't eat much meat, or hardly any meat. Therefore, it's a point on which I guess you've got an opinion.
It comes back to having a balanced diet. I think that in certain countries, definitely in the UK, we can afford to reduce our consumption of meat and dairy. The majority of people eat too much, they eat too many calories. We should, if you're going to eat meat, you could eat a much smaller portion. They recommend a portion that's kind of the size of the palm of your hand, but people eat a lot more than that. We have that luxury of being able to say, actually, we should be cutting down more. But in other countries where they don't have secure food supplies, there is that need to have nutrient-dense foods, which tend to be around dairy and meat.
Maria, I'm looking at some of the interview notes I got here, and it said, call it plant-based news, your magazine, your online thing, so that it would reach out to a wider audience, not just vegans. I'm an omnivore. I like vegetarian food. I like vegan food when my daughter takes me to a vegan restaurant. But convince me, I'm part of that wider audience.
There are several different reasons that people might choose to stop eating animals. And I think the best way to convince someone is to find out where their interest lies. Is it health? Is it the environment? Is it animal ethics?
You want me to give you an answer here?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you don't know me, and you don't know your readers necessarily, but if you're trying to reach out to a wider audience, they're an audience you don't know yet.
You have children. Maybe your children will have children, maybe they won't. We have a future generation which is facing a crisis. I've mentioned this before, but we really are facing an impending climate crisis. Anyone who feels any shred of responsibility towards the younger generations really has to look at the impact that their habits are having. The single biggest step we can take as individuals to improve the climate is to ditch meat and dairy. So on that basis alone, I would suggest people at least significantly reduce their meat and dairy intake. From an ethics point of view, I'd always recommend that people find out a bit more about farming. Farming has always been a very closed industry. It's quite hard to get information. The things we know about how a lot of farming operates is because of undercover investigations. These people aren't going to come out and show you the conditions on their farms. There are lots of things happening in slaughterhouses that we don't know about until we have undercover investigations.
Okay, I understand that one, but what about extremes? Yeah. Why not eat honey? Oh, because bees are being exploited. Well, do you know what I say? Fantastic. I like honey.
I guess with honey, it comes down to, I'm trying to think how to phrase this.
But I'm saying it's a matter of extremes. You can push everything too far. And by saying I won't wear a silk shirt because it's made from silkworms, because they're farmed. Well, these are not sentient beings, are they?
It's not extreme to not want to cause any suffering, and it's not extreme to not want to hurt
How does a bee
anything.
suffer?
Veganism isn't about pushing to the extreme or trying to take it to extreme lengths. It's about doing what you as an individual can do for the planet, the environment, animals, and your health. Veganism isn't this extreme thing that should be feared.
But it's a quickie, honestly, you don't have to take long to think about it. How do bees suffer? How do silkworms suffer?
Well, bees do spend their entire lives generating about half a teaspoon of honey, and then without thinking we just come and take it all. It is food that they make for themselves so they can survive, and then we replace it with some rubbish water and sugar mixture.
And the bees don't die then, do they? They keep producing honey.
They often do die, actually, the way that the
Silkworms?
honey is processed. So, silkworms, actually, silk, again, is an environmental issue. The process of making silk is actually incredibly gruesome. Silkworms are boiled alive. But silk's actually one of the worst fabrics for the planet as well. The impact of making silk is very heavy.
Okay, we need to talk more. I think that's the answer, isn't it?
Definitely. I think there's things that both sides could learn. I'm kind of disappointed to hear you say that that farming is a closed industry, because there's so much work that agriculture's been doing in recent years to try and get more people on farms to see what actually happens. I think that very often we see the worst case scenario, which is really unfortunate, and I'm not denying that these things do happen, but the majority of farmers are doing a really good job, and they would be devastated to think that...
Final word from our food expert here. I think our reporter said at the beginning this is being rammed down our throat. It is very much a London chattering class thing at the moment. Do you think that's going to spread? You're off to Norwich later today to do something about food. Do you think it's going to spread to the rest of the country? Very quick.
Okay, I would like to say that everybody had a privileged situation where they can suddenly just snap their fingers and go vegan, but we know we're still not in that state in terms of the whole of the UK. I do think the term plant-based is great because it does mean reducing meat and dairy, and it is possible for lots of people to do that. But again, it comes down to education. And that's where I think I'll have to leave that answer there.
Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. It's time for us to go. It's time to sit down for something to eat, though I'm not going to tell you what. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.